APO viewers. Welcome to Productivity Talk organized by the APO Secretariat in Tokyo. My name is Santi, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's session. APO viewers, from the past few decades, the government around the world have increasingly utilized digital platforms to deliver services faster and to reach more people. But just going digital might not enough. We need to understand how people behave and how people make decisions related to the digital services. So, in today's discussion, we will discuss how behavioral insights can be used to design better public services. Today, here with us, Professor Naomi Aoki from the University of Tokyo, Japan, Graduate School of Public Policy. Professor Aoki's current research is to investigate the social implications of the use of emerging technologies in public sector. Welcome, Professor Aoki. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Santi, and thank you for inviting me to this session.
Thank you, Professor Aoki. So today, Professor Aoki will explain behavioral insights and will also share some materials on this topic. And we will also ask some questions throughout the session. For APO viewers, if you have any comments or questions, please leave in the comments box. Okay, so Professor Aoki, we will talk about the applications of behavioral insights in the public sector. To begin with, can we know what is behavioral insights and what steps can be taken to apply it in the public sector?
Thank you again, Santi, and I'll do my best to address your questions. So as you said earlier, governments around the world are advancing the digital transformation of public services. They are using digital technologies and platforms to deliver public services faster, handle more transactions, and reach more people at a lower cost. In this way, they hope to increase productivity. Of course, digital transformation isn't something entirely new, but it feels more important than ever today with the rise of new technologies amidst the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And there is a phenomenal growth in the availability of data, and we are seeing a post-pandemic shift toward more digital interaction in our societies. That's why in this talk, I will be referring to these times as the digital age, and I will address Santi's questions in the context of these developments. This talk is organized as follows. In the first part, I will explain what behavioral insights are and share some ways they can be applied to public services generally. In the second part, I will zoom in on how these insights can help public services, specifically in the digital age. Before I proceed, let me clarify what I mean by public services, because this term can mean different things to different people. By public services, I mean services that citizens receive as end users, such as education and social services, as well as administrative services that the government provides to help citizens comply with laws or access entitlements like applying for permits or social benefits or filing tax returns. When I speak of public services in the digital age, I will be focusing on digital aspects of state-citizen interfaces, such as digital platforms that citizens can use to access administrative services and digital communication channels governments use to send notifications to citizens. That being said, let me move on to discuss behavioral insights, what they are, and how they can be applied in the delivery of public services. In general, behavioral insights has been defined as, quote, an understanding of the factors that drive behavior and how behavior can be changed, unquote. Disciplines like psychology and behavioral science offer valuable behavioral insights to help us see how people think, feel, and act, and how biases and heuristics shape their behavior. Applying behavioral insights means designing and using interventions based on an understanding of human behavior to achieve desirable goals. For example, a health authority may design and use an intervention to encourage citizens to adopt healthier lifestyles. A tax authority may design and use an intervention to motivate taxpayers to use a newly introduced e-filing system. We can say that interventions like these are behaviorally informed when they draw on behavioral insights. One type of behaviorally informed intervention is a nudge, which is famously defined as, quote, any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives, unquote. Here, the key term is choice architecture. This is the environment in which individuals make choices. A nudge intervention is an intervention designed to change some aspects of this environment and thus influence people's choices and behavior. There are many types of nudges. Let me introduce you to a few major ones. This slide describes a default nudge. This type of nudge preselects and presents the option authorities would like individuals to choose, so they will passively accept it unless they actively choose as an alternative option. So for example, if an authority should want people to enroll in a health insurance program, they would set automatic enrollment in the program as a default and give the applicant the ability to opt out. Default nudges leverage people's status quo bias, which is the tendency to stick to one's current choices. The interesting question is, why do we humans have a status quo bias? Researchers have offered a number of thoughtful and fascinating reasons for why this is so, as discussed by Samuelson and Zeckhauser, you see cited here. Just to pick one example, there is cognitive bias, specifically loss aversion. When individuals use the current situation as a reference point, they tend to weigh or perceive expected losses from switching to an alternative as greater than equivalent gains, which biases them in favor of the status quo. The next type of nudge is a framing nudge. This nudge leverages the tendency of human beings to respond differently to information when it is presented or framed in different ways. For instance, saying 90% of people survive versus 10% of people die communicate the same fact, yet people can react differently. A third form of nudge is the social norm nudge, sometimes referred to simply as a social nudge or a norm nudge. This type of nudge provides information like, this is what most people in your community do, or what they approve or disapprove of. It privileges people's tendency to align their behavior with social expectations. For example, if the government informs people are bringing their own bags when shopping for groceries, instead of using the plastic bags in the store, some people may start bringing their own bags as well. So, by informing them about common or expected behavior, the nudge appeals to people who are inclined to conform to social norms. The last nudge I will mention here is the educative nudge. It provides warnings, reminders, or information that call attention to something or teach people about it to influence their behavior. You might be wondering, isn't nudge a rather indirect way to get people to change their behavior? Yes, it is, and it's different from laws and regulations. In fact, if a government wants to change people's behavior, it can use laws and regulations to mandate certain desirable behaviors and prohibit undesirable ones. For instance, governments require the recycling of plastic bags and prohibit illegal dumping, and they may mandate motorcycle helmet use and prohibit drunk driving. However, nudges differ from laws and regulations in that they are subtler and more easily avoided, and they do not compel people to behave in a certain way. So they preserve freedom of choice while encouraging behavioral change simply by making certain actions easier and more likely to be chosen. I find it interesting that Thaler and Sunstein describe a nudge as a form of libertarian paternalism, as shown on this slide. They say that a nudge seeks to preserve individuals' freedom of choice, hence the libertarian aspect, while still influencing decisions and guiding behavior, hence the paternalistic aspect. Therefore, unlike laws and regulations, it is less likely to provoke resistance. Moreover, nudges are often seen as differing from financial incentives, such as subsidies. Financial incentives typically preserve one's freedom of choice. However, they involve economic stakes that strongly motivate or deter behavior. Here are steps that policymakers can take to put behavioral insights into practice. Step 1, identify the target population and the desired behavior. For example, suppose we are officials at the tax authority and we want citizens to use e-filing for tax returns instead of paper filing. In this case, the target population is taxpayers who currently file on paper, and the desired behavior is their adopting of e-filing. We may also set a measurable goal here, such as a specific number or percentage of taxpayers we would like to switch to e-filing. Step 2, analyze the context and identify barriers to the desired behavior. For example, we could look into why some taxpayers are not using e-filing. Is it because they are unaware of it? Or even if they know about it, are there motivational or practical reasons that keep them from using it? What do behavioral insights suggest as possible solutions? Step 3, design an intervention based on these considerations. Step 4, test the intervention with a subset of the population. Ideally, use a random sample to ensure representativeness and rigorously assess whether the intervention works. If it works, the final step is to scale up the intervention for the entire target population. If it does not work, we need to revisit the design of the nudges or consider alternative measures. The design of interventions or consider alternative measures. It's important to note that applying behavioral insight is an evidence-based process because of step number 4. So this step is very important. There are many methods that could be used in step 4 to test the intervention. One of the most common and rigorous is an experiment. And in this context, an experiment is a method in which subjects are randomly assigned to treatment and control groups. The treatment group receives a treatment, in this case, a behaviorally informed intervention, and the control group does not. The goal is to examine whether the treatment has an effect on their behavior, as illustrated in the figure on this slide. The strength of this method lies in the random assignments of subjects to experimental groups. This ensures that the groups are comparable, which in turn produces more reliable results with strong internal validity.
Thank you, Professor, for the explanation. So I learned about 4 nudges and also the definitions of experiment in behavioral insights. So I have questions about, can we say social media, especially through algorithm and also personalization, be classified as a nudges, digital nudges? And if so, is it the largest platform of such nudges?
Thank you, Santi, for the question. It's a very timely and relevant one. So social media itself is not a form of behavioral nudging, but information communicated through social media can be a nudge. And if we define a nudge as a purposeful intervention, then we can say that the behaviorally informed presentation of information on social media aimed at influencing users' choices and behavior is a nudge. You mentioned personalization, and I think this is an interesting topic. Nudges can be personalized in terms of content and timing based on the profile, situation, and behavior patterns of their target population. And I believe social media makes it easy to do this. I've seen studies that refer to these nudges as smart nudges. You also ask, is social media the largest platform for such nudges? I believe that depends on the number of people who are using any particular social media platform. And that said, social media is definitely one of the communication channels where nudges can influence a great number of people.
Thank you, Professor. On the other hand, in public policy, we also have traditional rational public choice theory. So I would like to know in what ways the four nudges align or maybe challenge this rational public choice theory in public policy.
Okay, thanks, Santi, for the question. So the four nudges I have described align with rational choice, rational choice theory, in that they also concern how people make choices and decide courses of actions. On the other hand, nudges systematically take advantage of ways in which people's choices deviate from those of the purely rational agents assumed by rational choice theory. The rational choice framework assumes that individuals are goal-oriented and seek to maximize utility. It also assumes they possess perfect information in order to weigh different options and choose the one that best achieves their goal, given their stable preferences about these options. In contrast, to influence behavior, nudges leverage human characteristics that a perfectly rational agent wouldn't act upon, such as biases, a limited attention span, and a susceptibility to social influences.
Thank you for the explanations. Now, Professor, could we also discuss how the applications of behavioral insights can be relevant into this digital age?
Certainly, Santi. Let me move on to part two to answer your question. So, in the digital age, behavioral insights can be applied to achieve two ends. One is to encourage citizens to switch from traditional to digital channels. The other is to promote desirable behavioral changes through digital interventions. In respect to the first area of application, a channel here is a platform or other means of accessing and receiving services. So what we are trying to accomplish can be called channel switching, changing from one platform or means of accessing services to another. This sort of change is relevant to administrative services that were once handled entirely through traditional government channels. These channels still use in-person, telephone, or paper-based means of communication, but services are now increasingly available via digital channels such as e-government and m-government channels. Compared to traditional government channels, digital channels offer clear benefits to citizens, such as 7-day, 24-hour access from most locations, which makes for greater convenience. They also help governments reduce the cost of human resources associated with in-person, telephone, and paper-based transactions. However, introducing digital channels does not mean citizens will use them. If adoption remains low, then they may be underutilized and governments may fail to fully reap their benefits. This underutilization can be remedied by using behaviorally informed interventions to encourage slow adopters to switch to the digital channels. A second area of application, which is shown on the right-hand side of the slide, involves digital interventions in the form of messages sent to citizens by a government to encourage desirable behavior. Public agencies used to rely on postal mail to send messages to citizens, among other traditional means, but now, because of digital transformation, they can send them by digital means as well. In the rest of my talk, I want to share two examples of empirical studies involving experiments in these two areas of application based on my understanding of them. Both of these studies were published in academic journals, but I think it's important to mention that the experiments described in these studies were conducted in collaboration with government entities. And my goal here is to illustrate how empirical testing has been done in the two areas of application. The first example is this study in the area of application I referred to as channel switching. And this study was published in Government Information Quarterly, and it was conducted by 3 authors from Finland. 2 of them were affiliated with the Finnish tax administration. According to the study, the Finnish tax administration launched its tax return online website to enable e-filing in 2008. However, adoption lagged behind expectations, and this resulted in operational costs which could have been avoided. To address this problem, the tax administration ran an experiment to test behaviorally informed interventions designed to encourage taxpayers to switch to the online channel. These interventions were communicated in letters delivered to taxpayers, and they were of 2 types. Informative nudges, which were essentially educative nudges I mentioned earlier, and they were consisted of information about the timing of the arrival of the pre-filled tax return and about the online filing system and how to use the online system. Social norm nudges, these are statements about how peers behave, such as the information that a majority of your age group files their tax returns online, and statements about how much filing on paper costs society. In other words, the benefits of switching to online filing. The tax administration prepared different versions of the 2 nudges and used them alone or in combination to create 9 treatments. That means there were 9 versions of letters, and the purpose of the experiment was to determine whether any of these letters would increase the probability that taxpayers would switch to using e-filing. An experiment featuring these many treatments is rare, but the article explains that this was done to address the desire of the tax administration to see how sensitive the responses would be to slightly different wordings. In this case, the target population comprised taxpayers who had submitted online tax returns in 2014 and 2015 before the experiment took place in 2016 and were considered slower adopters in this study. As shown in this figure, 20,000 subjects were randomly chosen from the target population and assigned to one of the 9 treatments, and another 20,000 subjects from the target population were randomly assigned to the control group. So the general finding was that all the letters had a positive effect on the probability that the slow adapters would switch to e-filing. The greatest impact was made by the version that included 2 types of social norm nudge statements. One involved a social comparison and the other a moral appeal. Although I couldn't find publicly available evidence indicating that the tax administration used the findings of the study, it's not hard to see that the findings could guide decision makers on which statements to include in future letters. The findings could be also used to justify the scaling up of the interventions in step 5. The cost of the scaling up can be estimated by multiplying the number of people expected to switch to online filing by the cost savings per switch and then subtracting the cost of sending the letters. Now let me move on to the second example, which is based on this study by 3 authors published in Public Management Review. As noted earlier, with the rise of digital transformation in public services, governments are increasingly sending notices to citizens through digital channels. Digital communication is far easier, quicker, and cheaper than communicating by other means, such as by post or telephone. As such, digital communication promises to be a powerful tool for promoting desirable behaviors in citizens. This study aimed to test whether this can be done. The experiment was a field experiment conducted in collaboration with the large Danish city of Aarhus. What is noteworthy about Denmark is that almost all its citizens receive official notifications via digital post from the public sector. Leveraging this infrastructure, the authors of this study tested whether an ICT-delivered health promotion leaflet would instill good dietary habits in citizens and promote physically active lives. According to the authors, this leaflet used infographics and informational nudges. They mentioned that they used the term informational nudges to mean educative nudges. The leaflet presented pictograms and bullet points of information on healthy eating and exercising and described their positive effects, and it offered simple advice on how to achieve both in everyday life with a link to a PDF file for further information. The researchers conducted 2 surveys. They used the digital infrastructure to deliver the first survey containing background and outcome questions to the citizens in the city. Survey respondents were randomly assigned to treatment and control groups. Those in the treatment group received a survey accompanied by a health promotion leaflet designed to encourage healthier dietary habits and increased physical activity. In the figure, you can see something interesting about this study. The authors investigated the effects of this intervention not only on behavior, but also on the participants' perceived motivation and ability to take up healthy habits, and included the participants' self-reported health outcomes. At the end of the first survey, respondents were asked about their motivation and ability to take up healthy habits, and a follow-up survey was administered later to respondents who had indicated a willingness to continue, asking about the condition of their health-related behavior and health outcomes. In the end, the study did not find support that the ICT-delivered government message changes perceived motivation, ability, or behavior related to healthy eating. The findings regarding the effects on motivation, ability, and behavior related to physical activity, as well as the results on self-reported health status, were mixed and depended in part on how the outcome variables were measured. Results like these can prompt policymakers to revisit and redesign the interventions to boost their effectiveness. Alternatively, policymakers could consider complementary strategies or other interventions to promote a healthy lifestyle, such as taxes on sugary drinks or urban planning that promotes walking and cycling.
Thank you, Professor, for the explanations and sharing 2 examples of experiments in behavioral insights. I would like to know, are there any examples of these experiments conducted in developing countries? And because I'm curious if there is any differences in the data availability and also digital literacy, and it will be impacted the successfulness of this intervention.
Yes, thank you, Sandy, for the question. And I believe your question relates to the implementation of experiments. To implement an experiment, it's important to have data that allow for the identification of individuals in the target population and the recruitment of participants. So yes, the availability of such data is essential. And the data literacy also matters. Today, we are talking about interventions involving digital communications. But if a large portion of the target population lacks access or the ability to use a digital platform, then interventions like these cannot be implemented in any reasonable way. I've read about experiments on digital nudging conducted in developing countries. And where digital literacy is low, researchers have used low-tech interventions such as SMS text messages.
Thank you. It's really clear. And now, Professor, what can we conclude about the use of behavioral insights in public services?
Thanks, Santi. So let me conclude with some key takeaways. Um, So, as you mentioned, as we mentioned earlier, governments around the world are using digital technologies and platforms to deliver public services faster, handle more transactions, and reach more people at a lower cost. In this way, they hope to increase productivity. In this digital age, first, behavioral insights can support public services in two main ways. One, by encouraging the use of digital channels, and two, by informing the design of digital interventions. This is the first key takeaway. Second, nudging is one type of behaviorally informed intervention. It is used to promote behavioral adjustments while not interfering with individuals' freedom of choice. Third, there are 5 steps to applying behavioral insights in public service delivery, as shown here. Fourth, experiments are one way to assess the effectiveness of behaviorally informed interventions. And lastly, the findings from an empirical investigation can help policymakers decide whether to scale up an intervention, refine it, or explore alternative strategies.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for sharing the key takeaways. It's very helpful to understand the topic of today's talk. And I still have few questions left, if it's okay.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So first, I would like to know what are the limits of applying behavioral insights in the public services, and if there is any situations or case where the traditional policy, traditional technique will be more appropriate.
Okay, so thank you for the question. I think I can address your question for each area of application we talked about. And as regards channel switching, nudges may not be enough to convince people to switch to the digital environment. Researchers have identified many factors that influence people's motivation or intention to use technology. For example, the technology acceptance model suggests that perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use influence the intention to adopt a technology. So it may be possible to use nudges to shape these perceptions. However, most importantly, the technology itself must be genuinely useful and easy to use. And this is a technical and engineering issue, and the nudge cannot address it. So it's also important to recognize that citizens may need to learn how to use digital devices and gradually become comfortable with them. So for this, an educative nudge may not be enough, and hands-on training might be necessary. And I know that in Singapore, the digital office provides digital ambassadors who offer personalized one-to-one and small group support to seniors who need help learning digital skills. And Rwanda also has a digital ambassadors program whose goal is to increase the population of digitally literate citizens and promote their use of e-services. In addition to nudges, hands-on support like this may encourage people to switch to digital channels. When it comes to using digital communication to encourage desirable behavior, nudges have limitations. They are meant to serve as economical and subtle interventions. They are not helpful for large-scale, persistent transformation. For that, traditional policies such as taxes, um, subsidies, and regulations might be more effective and enduring. So, if a government is looking for widespread transformation and if it can get legislative approval, more traditional incentives may be the way to go.
Thank you, Professor. So I highlight there might be some limitations in such certain situations.
Yes.
So the second question might be related to the limitations. Is there any situation, or maybe we can say digital nudges, unintentionally reinforce any exclusions or also inequality if it's not carefully designed? And if yes, what safeguard that we have to prepare and should be implemented to avoid or prevent this kind of situation?
I think that's a very important question. So, the answer to your question depends on which population we are talking about. And certainly, I believe digital nudges can reinforce inequality in situations where some people have access to digital devices while others do not. And those without access to digital devices miss out on the positive impacts digital nudges can have and the advantages others can get from them. In such cases, policymakers should be reminded of the importance of combining digital nudges with other means to reach those at a disadvantage. For example, they can employ phone-based nudges and community visits and in-person facilitation as alternatives.
Thank you for the explanation, Professor Aoki. So if I could summarize today's discussion into 2 points. The first point is digital tools and simple behavioral nudges can help governments to improve public service delivery by making services easier to reach more people and to make it faster. And this is ultimately the purpose is to increase productivity among other purpose as well. And the point two is while digital nudges are low cost generally and also effective for small changes, there are still some limitations. And for broader impact, maybe these digital nudges should be combined with traditional policy tools. Okay, so again, we thank Professor Aoki for sharing her insights on this topic. And last but not least, Professor, do you have any final remarks to be shared with APO viewers?
Before we wrap up, I'd like to quickly share the references I mentioned during my talk with you and the audience. And I also want to thank Santi and APO for inviting me to this session. It was a pleasure to have this conversation. And and finally, thank you to everyone watching this video. I really appreciate your taking time to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we thank Professor Aoki for sharing the informative and insightful talk on behavioral insights in public services in the digital age. So for APO viewers, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to share experience and insights on behavioral insight in the public service, please feel free to leave your comment in the comments box. And we will be appreciate and we will also learn on your comments. Please stay productive and goodbye for now. Thank you.